So I had a guy ask me, how did I become a computer programmer? That's a pretty interesting story because I didn't go to college, I didn't go to university, I didn't go the regular route that a lot of people do. A lot of what happened to me in my life was chance. And at one time or another, some guy used to tell me when I was working for him in a horrible job, he used to say, the job will find you, don't worry. And he was so right. You go way back 50, 45 years ago. I was back in Canada and I used to run a BBS system, which is a bulletin board service. Before that, I had a Tandy computer that, man, I worked like a dog to pay for that thing. It's like $1,200, which was like $1 million back then. And we saved things on cassette tapes. Well, I couldn't afford games, and I knew I would never be able to afford games because I was very poor. So I thought I'll just make my own games. And I did. I started out moving objects and moving things across the screen in my spare time when I didn't work. And back then I worked about every shitty job there was. And I remember making a coal cart, a little cart, move across the screen and travel down to the end. That was my very first thing I programmed. When it got to the end of the screen, it actually hit the screen and it fell apart in pieces on the ground. I was so excited, I thought I invented water. It was unbelievable. I showed it to a couple of friends. They went, "So what? What's that?" They didn't get how hard that was. Showed it to my mother, and she says, "Well, big deal. It fell apart. What is it?" Nobody understood how difficult that was to do when I had to put an array around that box and I had to move that box mathematically at a little bit at a time and not make it look jerky, but literally make it look smooth. There was so much that went into that little cart. It was just unbelievable the amount of code I had to do. Back then, we worked in Visual Basic. That's what the Tandies were. And you worked in DOS, which only the old timers probably know about DOS. So I go and open a BBS system. It was called a bulletin board system at that time. And that was before internet. So literally, you'd have a phone line come in. You'd buy a program. I ran a program called Wildcat. And that was about 60 bucks then. Pretty pricey. You plug the phone line into the back of the computer to a modem. Back then we had 2400 baud modems. I mean, that was extremely slow. You have no idea. Everything was done by characters. We'd have games on there. We'd have Dungeons and Dragons. Email was sent. Live chats. I mean, we pretty much had everything you have now without the graphics, except we ran with the characters. Later, they came up with the invention of the 14.4 modems and the 56.2 modems. The speed just got faster and faster, which made the entire BBS system so popular. Now, back then, you gave your BBS systems fancy names, like Dungeons and Dragons or Knights Chambers or whatever, and you were kind of hidden in the background. People knew there was a guy running it, but they never knew who it was. They never seen a picture of him. And later, we actually ended up having meetings in our area where you would meet up with other BBS operators and you would exchange ideas. Back then, if you bought yourself a $1,200 dish system, all emails were set inside the computer and it would go out once a day, so 1 o'clock in the morning. They would be compressed. They would go to the satellite, up they'd go out to where they had to go. These packets are going to Israel, these packets are going to France, these packets are going to Canada. And it was quite interesting, the programming and the software. It was designed to do that for email. Now, people that came from other countries into Canada, like Israel or China or Japan or whatever, it was how they stayed in touch with their loved ones. Now, by doing that, you were able to charge a monthly fee. It was like 20 bucks a month or something, to where now they could contact their loved ones. And it turned out to be pretty profitable. I mean, it was a couple grand a month, so it wasn't too bad. I mean, back then that was considered a pretty good living. Well, then you had a chance or a choice to travel into the dark side, is what you had. And that meant big bucks. So you had a choice to travel into the porn, you had a choice to travel into the other side, you had a choice to travel into craft games, stuff like that. Now there was a big site in United States of America called Rusty and Eddie's. It was huge. And each phone line you plugged into the back of your computer was called a node. My system had 8 nodes, so I was paying for 8 phone lines every month. Okay. Rusty and Eddie's, I think, was close to 130 lines, which is 130 phone lines. Every now and then, Rusty and Eddie's would actually post pictures of their setup and stuff, and it literally was a big room with windows all open, even holes cut in the side to allow wintertime into the building to keep their computers cooled. It was just amazing what us system operators did back then to keep everything running. There was no schools, no books, um, nothing. Everything was self-learned, and that was it. And then if you wanted to run 4 modems inside of one computer, they had a thing called a fossil driver. Not many knew about that. And it would keep track of that, so it helped you save money on computers comparing to run more modems. It got to the point where you could run 8 in one computer. So 8 phone lines, 8 modems in one computer. And if your processor was fast enough, and I mean, just all this terminology I'm using, you had to learn. No school, no books. You just learned it. Many guys that ran their BBS system had their boards just laid out on a table. They didn't even have a case. Wires going everywhere. That's the way I was. Because you were changing things so often, usually every month you were changing modems or you were changing, that it just saved time to have it outside the computer. It also allowed everything to cool very quickly. So that was kind of interesting. I went into pirated software and I made a pretty good buck. Um, Literally, you got to understand, these guys were downloading these games. It was taking them 2 weeks, sometimes longer, just to get one game. And sometimes you get games from other bulletin board systems like Rusty Nitties or other places, and that saved time, but you ended up paying for the long distance bill. So ideally, if you could crack the game, then obviously you're going to generate more money. So now the goal became to crack the game. So literally, I would sit in front of my computer with this game installed on a second system and trying to figure out how to crack the game. You would use binary code. You would go in back doors. I mean, again, no schooling, no books, just how do I get into that file? There was no internet to search on. There was none of that. You had your bulletin boards a little bit for some help, but there really wasn't much out there. A lot of it was your own imagination. And I have no idea to this day why I could tear apart a game, why I could look at it, why I could crack it. And the majority, I'd say, out of 100 games, 85 of them I could crack pretty easy, usually within a day. I have no idea why. I just chalked it up to being a natural. You're just good at it. And of course, you're not questioning it. You're not saying, I'm doing this and that. You're looking at the monthly income that's actually coming in. So now you went from 2,000, you went to 6,000. I mean, that's big bucks back then. And then all of a sudden you think, I can buy more computers, I can expand, I can do this, I can do that. And that's what you were more concerned about. It wasn't so much you were making more money, it was how much more can I expand? Now, the funny thing about modems back then, if you actually picked up a phone and you screamed into it, people could hear you through their modem at the other end. Because I don't know if you watch the old movies, but a lot of times when one modem connected to another modem, you'd hear these funny whistles and sounds when they connect, right? I ended up having somebody call me, and I don't know how they got a hold of me or anything, but I think they worked for law enforcement. And the person said basically one sentence: lock it up, they're coming to get you. That's all they said. Lock it up, they're coming to get you. And I went, damn. So now I had to pull my computers open and pull hard drives. Now I had the pirated software on certain hard drives, and I had other stuff on other hard drives. Again, no books or anything to teach you how to do that. That was just, how do I organize this stuff? So I pulled them, and within 10 minutes, I had them down 2 houses down at a neighbor's house, a buddy of mine. Within 1 hour, the RCMP, which would be considered Canada's FBI, I guess, showed up at my house. They had AR-15s, they had dogs. I mean, there was like 30 of them outside. It looked like World War III. I was shaking. I was young back then. I mean, I was shaking like crazy. I never seen anything like this. They confiscated all my computers. They took everything. They said, "We hear you're running pirated software." And I said, "No." I didn't know what else to say, right? And they took everything. It was going to be well over 6 months by the time I went to court. And I was like, "Oh, my BBS, everything I put in, it's down." Because computer programmers back then didn't think about the law. We didn't think, okay, different things were illegal. We thought everything was good to go. When corporations that were making games were thinking, we want to protect our assets. It was a whole different type of freedom back then. Well, I was picking up my phones and I was yelling, "We're shut down. Our CMP shut us down. Our CMP shut us down," over and over. And they would hear that through their speakers. I figured at least I could do is maybe warn some of them. And I mean, my phones would ring off the hook. I mean, you'd be talking, 40, 50 people every 20 minutes trying to get access to your system. And if all 8 lines were full, or 8 nodes, then they would have a busy signal and they'd set it to just read that, till finally they got in. For such a chaotic system, it was pretty amazing how it all worked. So I ended up, I think it was a week. All of a sudden, 3 brand new computers, were on my front porch. And there was an envelope with a note. I opened the envelope and the letter inside said, "Get the bitch set up." And I was like, no friggin' way. We're back in business. I pulled 3 computers in, pulled them out of the box, boom, 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 started coding them, add the fossil drivers, get this going. Oh, you need the modems, put the modems in, boom, 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 boom. I was going crazy. 8 hours later, BBS was back up. Phone lines were ringing. They were going in. You'd see the message. Yes, yes, all right. I mean, you literally felt like a hero. You just never seen anything like it back in those days. Nobody videotaped. Nobody took pictures. Oh, that world was something else. Needless to say, it did go to court 6 months later. They couldn't find any proof whatsoever because there was no pirated software. It did get thrown into court. They did get back my computers. And it definitely was an interesting adventure until that happened. Well, time went on. So internet started coming to be, and internet started coming on the picture with the phone modems. It wasn't done like it is now with DSL and cable. It was done with the phone modem still. And people that bought to run internet companies, you'd end up with 3 or 4 in every city that you would pay 25, $30 a month to, that you would call their phone line. So they were literally integrating a BBS into an internet. So they'd have a BBS program you called, but then they'd have a T1 line coming in that would split everybody out and give them that extra speed. Still had the BBS feel to it though. And BBSs actually took off after that. I mean, you had regular people finding you now. You had people advertising. People were like asking them, "Do you have any BBS places you know about?" Because they went up and down like changing socks. Some went up, some didn't. There was a board not too far from me. He was called Doctor. I can't remember. It was Doctor something. He was an actual doctor, and he had 12 notes, is what he had. Me and him used to talk quite a bit. It was quite interesting. Here you got the guy that doesn't have much education talking to a man that does have a lot of education. But when it came to the BBS system, oh boy, nobody could hold a candle to me. They didn't have any idea what fossil drivers were or how to connect them until they talked to me. And that was you had different channels. You couldn't have things on the same channels. Things would just not work. Again, no books, no nothing. You just knew how to do it. That was it. So, time goes on. I thought about buying into an internet company. I'd considered it a few times because now I was getting older. I wish I would have. It probably would have been okay for about 5 years and made a good buck. Internet expanded, went into your DSLs, your cables, and everything. Things got better and better and faster. BBSs kind of died to the wayside. Now it became a whole new ballgame. Now you've got stores. Now you got forums. Now you got people chatting live. You got people running video. Everything was up in the air going crazy. I never got away from the programming part. There was a few companies in Canada that I ran into, that I met, that wanted certain programs made. I'd use Visual Basic or C++. Again, See, I did use some books at that time. They started producing books then. So I wrote them. They were very happy. They paid me very handsomely. And I just kind of went on and did what other people did. I surfed the internet. And remember when I opened my first web page and I said, okay, so this is like a BBS. This is where I put things. And I originally changed it to red. And then I put 4 rectangles on the screen with a photo. And that was HTML programming. And I sat there looking at that and I was like, well, that's pretty cool. I only got to use 1 line of code to put an image up there and put the image in a folder and now it shows. Well, isn't that cool? Because before, you couldn't use images. So this became, again, another learning process. So now I'm learning HTML. Then the next thing you know, I was building HTML websites for companies and $200, $400, I mean, it wasn't big money. It was like once the days of the BBS had ended, you got poor again. So at that time, what was I doing? I was doing construction, laboring, tree farming. I mean, you name it. Every shitty job there was to do, I did it. Which is kind of funny because in my comment section on YouTube, people say, well, it must be nice to be a computer programmer. And a lot of times I just giggle and I think, you have no idea where I came from. I came from the poorest place you could come from. I ate the hot dogs, I ate the pork, I ate it all. Sometimes I ate hot dogs for a whole fucking month. I never gave up what I enjoyed. I always kept levitating back to it. I never understood why. My own father actually told me, he says, what are you doing? Why don't you get a job in a factory and stop messing with that computer shit? Nobody's going to use it. That's what my dad said. And of course, 30 years later, my dad would introduce me when I came into the house. Oh, and this is the computer programmer of the family. Just unbelievable. And, well, I wanted to run a classifieds. This is when the big money started. So I wanted to run a classifieds. I found a company that was selling a classifieds program, and I bought it. It was like $1,200. And they had a forum where people could talk on there about the program and stuff. Now I set it up. It was more of a horse classifieds where people would sell horses and go back and forth like that. Saddles and, you know, you'd have to set up your categories, design it, make it look decent, add your questions. There was a good amount of programming going on there. So I didn't run the stock site. I mean, it looked really pretty. And I would go to the forum, and anybody that had a question about that program, just that one program, would say, well, how do I do this? Or how do I do that? I would look at that question and I would say, I wonder how you do that. So then I go back and I asked the company for a second copy. I said, I want to try different things. Well, they gave me a second copy for free as long as I wasn't charging. I said, that's cool. So I was working on it, and then I come up with the idea, well, how do I do this locally? How do I set up a local server on my computer? And then I discovered WAMP and some other programs, and I set them up, and next thing you know, I could work from my computer, so that way everything was a lot faster. I didn't need internet, is basically. So whatever question the guys asked, I would sit back and try to figure it out. So they would turn around and ask things like, how do I tell the birthday of a client if they entered their birth date? Okay. I would then start programming in PHP and MySQL. PHP is just a computer language, and MySQL is a database program. Now, each program I mention here is a program. MySQL has its own rules, its own commands to make that work. PHP is the same, but they are two different. One does databasing, one works on screen. So I figured out, okay, let's ask the client for their birth date. I would set up a form, and that was done with PHP and HTML. The two of them were combined. And then when they actually submitted the information, it went into the database. So now we have the information on that client of when their birthday is. So now I just need a mathematical formula that will actually process and tell me this client's birthday when he logs in. So now we could place his birthday on the screen anywhere we want. Or we could email him and now add some more code to do that. It was just little things like that. And this went on for 2 or 3 years while I messed around in the forums doing that. So I'm not doing computer coding yet. I'm just really getting a kick out of me knowing the answers, and I can do this pretty easy. Why? Again, I never really had books until much later about PHP or MySQL. A lot of it was just, I just happened to know. Didn't make sense to me. I met my wife online, and we got to know each other quite a bit for a good year or so. And then I decided to come down to the States about a year later. So I came down. We were probably one of the first ones that actually met online, because back then everything was, if you met a girl online, you'd end up on Geraldo or some taboo show or something. It was considered a terrible thing to do, right? We had video cameras. We had them set up. She ran a regular video camera. She was actually pretty savvy when it came to computers. I taught her a lot back then. Then the next thing you know, when I did come down and we decided to go further with the relationship, well, I ended up getting married to her, and the Border Patrol and the rules of the United States did not allow me to work in the USA. And I thought, well, this sucks, because she was basically paying for me. And she was working a factory job, busting her ass. But they used to come into my house when I was in the States of Minnesota, and they would actually search my computer. They would come at 2 o'clock in the morning. They would come at 5. There was no rules or anything. I had no rights. You know, I couldn't say you can't come to my house at 2 o'clock in the morning. They just walk in. They didn't need a key. They didn't need nothing. They'd knock, and if you didn't open that door in seconds, they'd boot that door down. It was crazy. I guess I was a Mexican. I was only allowed to be in the United States for a certain period of time. I had to be in Canada more than I was in the States. So on the other side of the border, I had picked up a room off a guy, and I was working a little bit of a job there, but nothing of great value. So now we got married 2 days before 9/11. Boy, that was wrong. And they really weren't so good at giving out, you know, citizenships with anything like that. By the time I had ended up with citizenship, it probably cost me around $20,000 is what me and her figured out. They had me going to doctors to get tested. They had me getting physicals. They had me going to see other doctors. They had me go see psychologists. It was crazy everything they put me through. I was like, God, I'm just right next door, guys. Canada's right there. Didn't matter. Well, and I started getting angry. I really did. I really started getting pissed off when I would come across the border down there, and the guy would say, well, where are you going? And he knew where I was going. You know, it wasn't a secret. I'd look right at the guy and said, I'm going to get fucking laid. You want to come watch? Oh, I was pissed off. He'd just shake his head and say, go ahead. They knew where I was going. Come on. There's things so stupid in my life. Well, they got their money. I became citizen, and I was working on my website with the horses, and I needed a program, and I didn't have the knowledge to do it. I really didn't, even though how good I was. The company that I was dealing with knew somebody. I got a hold, and it was a woman, and I contacted her. She was young. She was about 34, 35. And she told me what it would cost, and it was a little over $3,500. It was a lot of money to me back then. I was working at a corner store where people pumped gas, and I'd make donuts. I think I made $11 an hour. And I saved every dime I had, and my wife helped me to pay this girl her money to write the program that I thought would really boost it. Got it done, and it was making money, but then we had to upgrade, and when I upgraded, I lost all her shit. I contacted her again, thinking she's already got the code, right? No, she turned around and wanted to charge me 3 times the amount because she said the upgrade changed too many things. I was like, are you kidding me? So it was a shakedown. It's what it was. And a lot of programmers did that back then. I mean, if they got you and they figured out they had you and there was nothing you could do, they'd shake you down, charge you triple, 4 times, 5 times the amount. I was not impressed. So I looked at my wife and I said, look, I need 1 year to learn this. I says, that's what I think I need. And she says, what do you mean to learn it? I says, I need to sit down with this computer 12, 14, 16 hours, 3 days a week just to study PHP, MySQL, jQueries. I need to understand this. She says, so you're telling me you're going to quit your job? I said, yep. And you're going to concentrate on learning that? I said, yes. And then I'm going to go to work and hold the fort. I says, that's pretty much it. She says, but you still watch the kids when I'm working. I said, sure I can. And she agreed, and that's what we did. I spent 1 year busting my ass, and I didn't lollygag around or sit around and watch soap operas or TV or anything. I literally was on that box, you know, nonstop, sometimes 4 days, 3 nights straight, just trying to figure out, okay, I've accessed the database. Now, how do I move these categories over to this and this database? And how do I do that? And I was practicing. I was in a forum on the internet with a bunch of programmers, and those guys would laugh at me because I didn't know the technical terms that they were using. I was constantly asking them in the forum, well, what does that mean? Why did you say that word? It means this when you connect them in an array in the database. I'm saying, yeah, but what is an array? You know, I didn't know nothing. And boy, they made fun of me. Oh my God, they trolled me so hard. I did not give up. I still kept punching at it. And every time I learned something new, I went, okay, I got that. Now I get it. And it got easier, but not at first. Oh, first 3 months were hell. Well, after 1 year, I was pretty confident now. I pretty much knew what I was doing. I was pretty good. And some guy called, and he asked me if I could do something to his classifieds. And my wife happened to be home that day, and she was listening. I was kind of wishing she wasn't home because at that time I didn't have the confidence yet. I was actually scared because here I am. I asked my wife for me to take a year off, and this guy has a job for me now. If I tell him no, or I tell him a super high price, or I try to get rid of him, she would get pretty pissed off, wouldn't she? So I told him at that time, I think it was $8,000 to do this job, which really was super cheap for what he was asking. It should have been like a $25,000 job. But I told him 8,000 thinking that's a big number. He'll leave for sure. And then he'll say, no, it's too much and I won't have to do it. And, the wife won't be mad and everything will be good. Right? No, it's not what he did. He said, I'm going to need your banking info and I'll deposit half in the account tomorrow. I said, all right, I'll email you my banking info. I didn't believe he'd do it. So I sent him my banking info, and sure enough, when the wife woke up, I mean, she was doing the most hilarious dance in the house. Oh my God, he paid you 4 grand right in the account. She says, let's go shopping. I says, we're not going shopping. She says, why not? I says, well, number one, the job ain't done. I don't even know if I can do it. I said, so until the job's done, we can't spend shit. What if I got to refund it and we spend it all? She never thought of any of that. We did spend a little bit of it. We bought some groceries, 300 here, 100 there as I was working on it because we didn't have any food. And I said, oh, I hope I can do this. And of course, she's in the background being my cheerleader. She said, you can do it. Come on, you got it. I'm like, yeah. Nobody else but her cheering me on, all alone. Took about 30 to 45 days. I think it's closer to 45 days. I banged off his project, what he wanted. I even added some things that I thought it needed. And I showed it to him. He was immensely impressed. He says, I can't believe you added that other stuff and it was needed. I said, well, it didn't make any sense not to do it. Thus, we come back to my dad, where if you're going to do a job, do it right the first time. And I did it. So the next thing you know it, he paid me the other 4 grand. He came back a week later, found a couple bugs. I went and fixed them, no charge. And it all began from there. Of course, my wife was very happy. We went shopping at Walmart. I mean, she literally had 4 carts behind her of just complete junk you never need. I bought camping stuff I did not need. Oh, the shit we bought back then. And that's when it began. So then I started writing what was referred to as add-ons. The program never used add-ons. I thought, what if I could take their program and write little programs that would attach to them and make the product better? My idea. I contacted the company, gave my idea, and they said, yeah, we could write hooks where you could tap into those hooks in different parts of the main program. I said, would you do that? Oh, yeah, we'd be more than happy to. That would actually make our product worth more money. So they did. And all of a sudden, they released a product with a whole bunch of hooks. Next thing you know it, I'm writing add-on after add-on after add-on. So do you need something for horse breeds that sets up, all the different breeds and everything that horse was with? Do you need a birthday thing? Do you need something that allows people to upload with an Excel sheet and post all these ads inside of classifieds? I was writing all this stuff, is what I was doing. I was literally sitting there for 6 months writing this little program to attach to that program. And then when I released the program, oh, I just sent out a newsletter, and there was at that time well over 6,000 customers using that program. 90% of them would buy it. So I would sell it for like $100, and then you can do the math. But that what was going on. Some add-ons took me 2 months to write, some took 2 weeks, some took 6 months, and that would determine the price, is what it would do. And this went on for over 20 years. I just kept producing code. I never went to school. I never gained some scholarship. I never did any of that shit. Everything I did myself, taught myself, learned myself, bought the odd book here and there, but most of it I just knew. Time went on, and then last 5 years, computers are getting hacked into. My clients are that I know personally. I've known them for 20 years. I've known their kids. When they've gone on vacation, they've sent me pictures. I mean, I have a personal relationship with my clients. It's amazing. And they have never left me. A lot of them they just keep telling me I've never met anybody that has my interests at heart and doesn't rip me off. See, I have a rule. I will not take any business my clients do and duplicate it and do it myself. In other words, I will not cut their grass. And I've kept that for my entire life. So I have clients that do make millions of dollars. I have clients that make a lot more. And sure, I could probably run off that idea and probably do better than them and make more money. But good as that if you're not working anymore. I just didn't see it. Now, some clients, I have stock in their companies. Some clients gave me stock in their companies. Um, there's a lot of other things going on back there. There's one I'm working on right now with the client that is probably going to end up being a billionaire. And he has sent me 20% stock, and he's just so amazed. He's been trying to get his idea, his dream, off the ground for the last 8 years. He's been dealing with Indians. He's been dealing with other programming companies in the U.S. He's been dealing with a lot of different people. And then he heard my name, and somebody told him, because I don't advertise, and he called me. I listened to him. I went through what he was trying to do. Some of it was pretty complicated. And what he wanted, it took me 7 months to produce. And starting, I think in the next 2 weeks, he goes out and starts selling it to certain people. So he's there. He's he's so happy. And yes, it's because he's going to make a lot of money. But when you hear certain clients and you hear how happy they are because you created something and you made their lives a little happier, it feels good. It really does. And when you sit back and say, I did that, I created that, nobody else knows. Only you know. And I think it's kind of funny. But all my life, from the time I was like 16 years old, I've been attracted to computers. Even before computers became popular. And, oh, let me tell you this one more thing. When I was young, I had bought a motorcycle, and I got into a motorcycle accident and lost 1 inch off my right leg, which you'll see I wobble with my backpack. And they had put me through therapies, and I don't know what you call them, but to help me when I was healing. It took me over a year to learn how to walk. It was a rough time back then. And I remember them sending me to this rehab center where they were supposed to be testing me, where you stand in front of a bunch of mailboxes and put mail in. They were trying to determine what kind of jobs you could do, is what they were doing. And I kept telling them, I says, look, I'm good at computers. They didn't want to believe me because they'd look at me and say, well, what references do you have? Do you have a diploma? I says, no, don't have any. Just kind of know it. And it was funny. They gave me WordPress back then, and the secretary had drawn up a list of things they wanted me to do. There was like 50 things. And they said, have this done by the end of the day. Let's see how good you are. I said, all right. I took a look at the list. They gave me the book. I was like, oh, that's a joke. Shit, I do this in 20 minutes. So I put it away. I went outside, had a smoke back then when I smoked, and they were constantly on me. I mean, through the day, they were like, are you going to go do that? You know, you're running out of time. Yeah, I'll get to it. I really didn't want to. It was boring, is what it was. So I think there was like 1 hour left, and I walked in there, and in about 20, 25 minutes, about a couple things in the book. I did it. I printed, and I walked out, gave it to the secretary. I said, this is what you wanted. She looked at it. She says, dead on. And they couldn't believe it, especially how late I walked in. I wasn't trying to show off or anything. I just found it boring, is what it was. And that's another thing with computers. I mean, if something I've done it over and over and over and over, it's like I procrastinate. Clients like, you get it done? Yeah, I'm going to it. But it's something super hard or super difficult, like, I don't know, I ran hacking a website, for example. I mean, that is very interesting. You know, that's where did they get in? How did they get in? How did they know to do that? You know, and it's like, I'll spend 6 hours and yet I'll only charge the client 1 hour just because of how cool it is, you know. But I think a little different, I guess. So all this keeps maturing, and here I am 60 years old. So, and it wasn't because I went to college. It wasn't because I went to university. It wasn't because of any of that. Nothing. Now, back in Canada, I had a teacher that actually seen how good I was with computers in college. And because I'd taken some little sideline course, and he seen how good I was in what I was doing, and he wanted me to go to school. He wanted me to go through for networking because I was pretty good at that. And when he went and presented the information to the board of the school said they wouldn't do it. They wanted to credit me 2 years, and I'd only do 1 year and then pass. The school would not do it because they wanted their money. And then he looked at me and says, well, they're saying you got to do the whole 3 years. I'm like, what am I going to do? 3 years sitting there twiddling my thumbs? I already know this shit. I mean, this is Mickey Mouse. And I never did it. I was like, I'm not going to sit there 3 years doing this and falling in line and all this crap. Again, programmers walk their own drummer. And we are different people. That's for sure. And I liked it because I really don't like people. I don't mind making videos. I don't mind talking to the odd person. But when it comes to groups, or even when I was younger, working in construction firms and stuff like that, I hated people around me. It seemed like they're always trying to rat you out, or they're always trying to do something. So let me end this. This is probably quite a long time, but hey, this is what happened. There's two stories I'm going to tell you which affected me in my life. I was visiting my grandfather before he died in an old folks home, and I kept talking about real estate and making money and rich dad, poor dad, and all this stuff back then. And this old man heard me talking to my grandfather, and he looked over at me and told me to come back the next day and he'd tell me how to make $1 million. And I was like, oh, give me a break. He says, I will. You come back tomorrow. I'll tell you how to do that. He wanted company, right? So I was like, okay, fine. I'll come back tomorrow, old man. No problem. So I come back and I spent about an hour talking to him. And I says, so tell me, how do I make that million you promised me? He says, well, I'm going to tell you. He says, you'll notice if you invent the push of the button, you'll be a millionaire. He said, now, when I was a kid, we used to have to get up and turn that television. Now you push the button. He says, when I was a kid, you used to have to go down to the creek to wash the clothes. He said, now you push the button. You invent the push of the button, and you'll be a millionaire. That always stuck with me. Another guy that I was working for, and it was weeping tile, it was working in shit, it was working in piss. I mean, it was a horrible job. And, you'd be down there working with the pipe and see logs floating up, and you're like, oh my God. You got paid okay, but man, oh man, what a job that was. And he told me, he said, because I asked him, why didn't he work in the factories? And he turned around and told me, he says, look, factories come, factories go. I'll tell you what, if you find a job that is the shittiest job out there that nobody wants to do, and you do it better than anybody else can, you'll always have a job. That always stuck with me, those two guys. Nobody wanted to do programming because it was hard. And when I wrote programs, I wrote them as a push of a button. So anybody, when they logged in and they started playing with the program they paid for, they found it super easy because I had help boxes that would pop up, different things like that. I mean, I made it so user friendly, it was unbelievable. And those were the rules I followed because of those two guys. So when you do those shitty jobs or when you do certain things in life, you don't know if it's going to lead into something else. And that is so true. But you will find your way, or the job will find you in the end. But I mean, I've shortened this as much as I can, but there's a lot more in the background I haven't told you about. I can't tell you about. But this is how I became a computer programmer. Catch you guys later.